In this demo, we'll be using 12 photos that we've imported into Lightroom that we will be using to build out a photographic typology on a 13 by 19 inch Photoshop canvas for printing. So I have 12 photos that I've starred out and selected from my photo shoot here, and I'm just double checking they're all there. This is great. I am noticing that I would like to make these all feel a bit more uniform and cohesive. Some of them are horizontal, some of them are vertical in format, and I want to make sure that I've maintained aspect ratios and they're all roughly the same size. So to do that, I am going to go into my develop mode, where I can start to make those crops and adjustments. So my crop tool is the keyboard shortcut R, or the letter R on your keyboard, which is going to give me a nice crop window. Now, if I'm cropping my images, I want to make sure that my lock over here at the right-hand side is locked in. If it is not, my crop is going to be going everywhere, so I want to make sure I've locked in my crop. And then for my aspect ratio, I can stick with my original aspect ratio if everything's the same. I photographed everything in horizontal or everything in vertical, or I might choose to crop at a square or a 1:1 crop ratio, or I could crop at a 4:5 or 8:10 ratio. And here I've got that aspect ratio, that 4:5 ratio being maintained. Once I've got my crop in a place that looks right, I'm going to hit enter. As I move on to the second photo in my set from my typology, I'm noticing, well, this one's horizontal instead of vertical. What can I do to make this feel more unified? I will, again, hit the R button to crop, and I'm going to set my aspect ratio to 4:5 or 8:10. But if I want my crop to be at a vertical perspective instead of a horizontal or a landscape perspective, I'm going to hit the X button on my keyboard. And that's going to change my crop ratio to vertical instead of horizontal, or vice versa. And from there, I can pull that crop in so I've got kind of a consistent, nice, even spacing across my set. And I'm going to do this to each of my 12 photos, just like this. Something important to mention here is that as you're doing this on your photos, you will ideally be using your raw photos that you've edited from your photo shoot. When you look down here and take a look at my photos, I am editing high-resolution JPEGs, which is not an ideal scenario for this. We want to be editing our RAWs and cropping our RAWs so we have all of the pixels to work with instead of recompressing existing JPEG files. But I'm using the JPEGs for the purposes of this demo so that you have a more streamlined way of seeing how all of these steps are coming together. So again, I'm hitting R and I'm hitting X as appropriate and making sure that as I'm cropping, I have about the same amount of background or negative space as I have containing my subject. So each of these gets cropped. At the 4:5 aspect ratio, and I'm doing this 12 times. If you are happy with your framing, everything is looking really nice and uniform, you may not need to crop a whole lot, which is totally fine. The thing that we're looking for, and something that you might be noticing, is that some of your objects are smaller, some of them are bigger. The crop allows us the flexibility of unifying that set to where we have an even more tightly organized sense of visual continuity across the set of pictures. And we've got one more, and we will be ready to, I'm hitting R, and we will be ready to export here very shortly. So I've got 12 photos. Now all of these are looking far more unified as far as what I'm working with. I hit the G button on my keyboard to be able to see grid mode, and now I'm ready to export these specifically for my prints. So I'm going to hit Command A to select all. Alternatively, you could click the first one in the set, hold down the Shift key, and click the last one. But I find that Command A is a pretty fast and easy way to do this. I'm going to right-click on that set and go to Export, Export. And I'm going to set this up to export into a specific print folder in my hard drive. So in the export location, I'm going to go to Specific Folder. I'm going to hit Choose. And I'm going to set up within my main photo shoot folder that has my date, I'm going to set up a folder that says something like print JPEGs or JPEGs for print. And we'll have that folder to work with for this set. Clearly, I've exported these before, so you can see that I'm kind of duplicating that process here. And then I'm going to eliminate the put in subfolder, and I'm going to check rename to, and we're going to go to custom name and sequence. Here is where you can put in your first name underscore last name underscore typology, and the sequence will appear after that naming convention so that it will help you stay organized. Image format is going to be JPEG, and make sure if you're ever exporting JPEGs, we want all of the pixels. So we're going to pull up the quality to 100, and the color space, we're going to set that to Adobe RGB 1998, which is the color space we need for our prints. So that's going to stay nice and consistent. We are not resizing the images. We're just doing a very light compression in this export. And then I want to sharpen for matte paper. Amount standard, we're going to include all metadata. We're going to not include watermarking or any kind of post-processing. And then I will hit export, and I should see that export process populating and completing up there in my window for Lightroom. And then if I look inside of my print folder, you can see those JPEGs as they start to come up. So these are going to be the JPEGs we'll be popping into our canvas for printing. I'm going to open up Photoshop and give you a little bit of a glimpse into the future, what this is going to look like once we've pulled in and sized all of our images correctly, and you can see the spacing around and throughout is pretty even and consistent. And I've got different layers that are populated in that Photoshop file that I'll need to get rid of. I'll need to flatten this before I send it off for printing. But we're going to start from the very beginning. File, New, in Photoshop. And to set up your canvas for your Photoshop print, you're going to change where it says Untitled 1 to the correct name. So it will be first name underscore last name underscore typology underscore 13 by 19 underscore, this is going to be a good starting point. So make sure that you have the actual sizing of your document, your canvas, your paper that you're using in your file name here. And then for our width, we're going to change that to inches. If I know that I'm making a vertical canvas and my dimensions are 13 by 19, I'm going to put in 13 for the width, 19 for the height. We're going to keep this as a vertically oriented document. I'm going to keep resolution at 300, which is my print DPI, my print resolution. Color mode is going to be RGB color at 8-bit. Background contents, we'll keep that at white. And I need to make sure that I've set my color profile to Adobe RGB 1998, and I'll hit Create from there. And that's going to give me my Photoshop canvas that I'll be working with to set up that grid. Previously, I did a drawing where I mapped out all of my pictures, a grid of 3 by 12, and figured out that in order to fit 3 across and 4 down, that I would need to make the width of each of my pictures about 3.5 inches. So I'm going to go and find where I actually exported these print JPEGs to, and find that first one there, and I can either right click and hit open with Photoshop, or I can pull that directly into my Photoshop window. I could run a quick image diagnostic on this photo by going to Image, Image Size, and you can see already it's going to be almost as big as the grid itself. It's already sized at 12.4 by 15.5, but the resolution is also not the same. It's at 240. So if I determined that my width, in order for this to fit, needs to be 3.5, I can put in 3.5 width, and the height is 4.375. It already sized it for me. That's great. And I'm going to make sure that I set my resolution to 300. And I'm going to hit OK, and it's going to get smaller. So now I can make my selection to bring that into the grid with my rectangular marquee tool. I'm going to hit the keyboard shortcut M and drag a box over that image, hit Command C to copy, and I'm going to come back over to my grid, my blank grid, and hit Command V to paste. And it pops up as a layer over here. If you want to be super organized, which I recommend, like let's say this is a picture of shoes, or this is a picture of a plushie or something that's important to you, you can actually rename your layer by that object. So this one I'm just going to call yellow because all of my backgrounds are different colors for this particular typology. If I hit the keyboard shortcut V, that sends me back to my Move tool, and I can start to position this picture where I think it's going to end up in the grid. Once I've resized this JPEG, I really don't need to keep the tab open, nor do I need to save it. I've just resized it for the purposes of bringing it into the typology, so I can X out of this once it's been resized and hit Don't Save. So I'm going to do this a couple more times, and then from there we'll go back to our full grid as a little fast forward and show you what the next steps are. So I'm dragging this image into Photoshop. I'm going up to Image, Image Size. We're going to type in the width at 3.5, change the resolution to 300. Now if you have horizontal images, or you've set up your typology to be a horizontal typology frame, I made the calculation today that if you use the width 4.3 and you let Photoshop calculate what the height is for you, that will all fit in a horizontal version of the 13 by 19 canvas or sheet that gets printed out. So if that's helpful and you've been sizing your images with a 4:5 aspect ratio, you can type in 4.3 as the width, and that works based on that drawing. So I hit OK, I hit the M button for my marquee tool, and I'm just going to drag a big box around this image, hit Command C on my keyboard to copy, and come back into my grid, Command V to paste. And then I can grab my Move tool here, and what's really nice about Photoshop is that these magenta lines are showing me if images are both centered on each other and also centered in Photoshop. So let's do one more so we can get the grid nice and centered. We'll pull this into Photoshop, Image, Image Size, width is going to be 3.5, resolution, always set that to 300 for printing. I'm going to hit OK. I'm going to grab my rectangular marquee tool, or M, drag the box, Command C to copy, and Command V to paste. And then I can move that into place. And you can already see Photoshop is telling me that these are 78 pixels apart from each other, which is really helpful, but they're not centered on the full grid. So first off, I can go through and relabel all of these different layers to help me keep track of them. And then second, if I click the top layer, hold down the Shift key, click the bottom layer, have them all selected, I can actually move them all until Photoshop is telling me that they're centered on that canvas, which is very helpful. And then I can keep going back and doing this as I bring in more of my images for my personal typology, center them up until we've got something like this. So this one I was a little bit careless with my layers. I was not labeling them by what's in them. So on second take, I'd probably go back, relabel all of these so I can move them around. But now I've got a document that's almost ready for printing. So the first thing that I'm going to do is, we talked about how prints are always a little darker than what you see on the screen. So I'm going to make a curves layer to compensate for that. I've already made it on this one, so I'm going to get rid of this and show you from scratch how it's done. I want to make sure that I'm at the very top. This curves layer is going to sit on top of all of my layers in Photoshop. I'll go up to the Adjustments tab, find Curves, that pops up, and I've got my histogram right here. I'm going to find that very center point of the curve, and essentially I'm going to pull it out towards the top left corner just a little bit to add just a pop of light and compensate for slight darkness in printing. And if I want, this is optional, you can pull in your black point a little tiny bit for just a pop of contrast. And this is a super subtle edit. If I put that eyeball off and on, it's not much, but it will make a difference as you're sending your files for print. From there, I want to make sure that I have saved this as my, my document that has all of my layers, my curves, etc. So I'm going to hit Save. Now, I'm about to flatten this image for print, which is going to mean all of my layers get compressed into one thing, into one layer, which means I won't be able to go back and re-edit. So I want to make sure that my flattened version is saved differently than my version that has all of the layers. So I'm going to go to File, Save As, and I'm going to call this one the same thing, but I'm going to make a note, it is flattened. So this is a different file than the one that has all of my layers in case I accidentally mess up, save it, and close it, and then I can't get back to all my layers. So I'm going to save this one as a slightly different, a different Photoshop file. And if you're not seeing this full dialog box, you can just click the little arrow that's next to the where, and that will expand it so you know you're putting it in your hard drive, in the right folder, etc. And then you can hit Save. And what's going to happen is now I've got a version that's just the flattened version, which means I can go through and flatten it for the art support office. So I've clicked the top, very most top layer, which is the curves layer, and then I'm going to go scroll to the bottom, hold down the Shift key, and click the background layer. So now all of my layers are selected. I'll right click and go to Flatten Image, and now everything is on one layer on the background. From there I can hit Command S to save it, and this is the version that I'm going to be sending in to art support. So that flattened file that I just made, this is what I'm going to upload to art support's Dropbox when I'm ready for that step. While you're here though, there's one more thing that you need to do, which is export your photo as a JPEG so that you can submit that to Sakai for grading for this class. So that's the last thing that I'm going to show y'all how to do in this demo. So if you just want to make a compressed JPEG version that's not the super huge PSD file, which the submission folder probably will not accept anyway, you need to go up to File, Save a Copy. File, Save a Copy, and you are going to probably want to make a new folder. And just call this one like Sakai JPEG so that you know where it is. This is your compressed JPEG just for submitting for your grade. And for format, we're going to change that to JPEG. Color profile, Adobe RGB 1998. And for this one, you can keep it with that full name, but really all you need is your first name underscore last name underscore typology.jpg and hit save. You're going to get a dialog box that pops up asking how big of a JPEG. We want the very least amount of compression, so I'm going to make sure that I've scaled my quality all the way to 12 or maximum. So make sure you scale the quality to 12 and not end up with a small JPEG file. And then you're going to hit OK. And now you've got your JPEG to submit along with your self-reflection and your list of 16 things into Sakai for a grade. And that's how you prepare your typology for print. Thank you so much.